Welcome back, America. We're here with America's governor. That's what I call him. The governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis. Now, why do I call him that? Because I'm a resident of Florida, and everybody else wants to be a resident of Florida for a reason. Governor, you run a very efficient state. You have no income tax. You're looking for ways to cut property taxes. Most of the people I meet in Florida are very, very happy with their state government. Most of the people I meet in other states are not. You were a member of the House of Representatives, and when you were a member of the House, you were one of the most fiscally conservative of the House members. You see what's going on now. I talked about Convention of States. I know you're a big proponent of Convention of States. What is the best advice that you could give the American people, or Congress for that matter?
Well, Mark, as you say, in Florida, we have the lowest, the smallest state government per capita in the country. We have the second lowest debt per capita in the country. We've retired 41% of the state's debt over 180 years just since I've been governor. It's gone off the books. We've cut taxes. We've done a lot of great things. But I don't know that that could have been done if we didn't have constitutional restraints on the legislature and on spending. So we have term limits in Florida, which I think is really important for legislature. We also have a balanced budget requirement. So I veto stuff. I vetoed 3% of the budget one year, and you got to make tough decisions. And I would have done that anyways, but I'll tell you, having that mechanism there to force those decisions is critical. So I don't think we're going to ever see Congress reform itself without constitutional reforms. And the Founding Fathers provided two different ways you could amend the Constitution or to propose amendments. You could do 2/3 of each house of Congress, but they also knew that Congress may be the problem. And so if you needed to do an amendment that required 2/3 of Congress that was going to change incentives in that body, those members may not want to do that. So they allowed 2/3 of the states to certify an amendment via an Article 5 Convention of the States. In each instance, ratification of the amendment's the same. It requires 3/4 of the states. And so I'm a believer that the states have a fundamental role right now in reforming Washington. And there are things you and I have discussed. I know you've written a book about this, and there are many things that need to be done. But clearly, we need term limits for members of Congress. We've got to change the incentive from just trying to stay there forever to actually try to accomplish big things, take political risks, take heat to make tough decisions. And then we do need a balanced budget requirement. They almost passed one in the late 90s. Our budget was balanced at the time as a country. We've added about $30 trillion in debt just this century, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. And I don't think it will ultimately be fixed unless you have that constitutional requirement that Congress balance its books.
And under your leadership, the state legislature in Florida did, in fact, and has, in fact, participated in the Convention of States process, hasn't it?
Yeah, so Florida has certified the slate that Convention of States organizations endorsed. They've also certified individual Article 5 amendments, balanced budget. They did that years ago. I think there are now 28 or 29 states for balanced budget amendment. 34 is the trigger for Article 5 to actually write an amendment in the convention and then perhaps send it to the states. And then the Florida legislature has also done a standalone term limits. And so I think all this stuff is getting momentum. I've gone to different states over the past few months and spoken about these issues. There's a lot of interest in these legislators because ultimately, and you and I are of the same mind as this, but people do need to be reminded, the federal government didn't create the states. The states created the federal government. It was the states that came together to create the U.S. Constitution. And we have a unique system where the federal governments are at least supposed to be few and defined, and the remaining powers to the states are numerous and indefinite. We play a huge role in constitutional change, and Article 5 is the mechanism that the Founding Fathers gave us.
You know, Governor, I hear state representatives and state senators all the time say, you know, the darn federal government is dictating this and dictating that. And I say, do you understand how much power you have? Do you understand if you get organized in your state and organized with other states, that you can actually change the trajectory and there's nothing Congress can do about it? And so I think it's very important that this evening we're talking about Convention of States, given what's going on in Congress right now. And Governor, my position has been, Some of these guys have been around forever, but some of these members of Congress, they've been complaining about it forever. Why don't they at least support this effort in their states to get the ball rolling where their states haven't done it? We'll be right back.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.